Okay, I think we'll make a start. The time in London is 10 o'clock. Welcome everybody who have joined today's webinar. We know that there are people from literally all over the world. So good morning to you who are in Europe. Good afternoon and good evening to those of you further east and south of us today. So today's webinar is entitled Using Cyber Risk Ratings to Assess and Monitor Third Parties at Scale. Today's webinar is presented by my company, Elasticito. I'll tell you a little bit more about us in a moment. We're also going to be showing you the NormShield Cyber Risk Assessment platform during the live demonstration today. And yes, we are going to try and do a live demonstration. Hopefully the gremlins will stay away. So a little bit about us. I'm Ronan Lavelle, and I'm going to be joined today by my colleague, Andrew Brown. And we are basically specialists in cyber risk. We help companies to identify and then ultimately manage the key cyber risks that their companies and their third parties face. A little bit of housekeeping. The webinar today is being recorded, and a link to that recording will be sent to you within 24 hours of the webinar finishing. We would really encourage you to ask any questions that you have along the line today. We will answer those questions at the end of the session, if that's okay. But at the bottom of your panel, if you mouse down, you'll see a Q&A button. And we encourage you to jot down any questions when they appear in your head, and we will try and answer as many questions as we can at the end of the session. So just to recap, today we're talking about using automating technology to help information security teams and corporate risk teams to assess the cyber risk of third parties. But today we're going to talk about all third parties and not just the high priority or the high risk ones, or at least perceived high risk ones. We want to show you that it is possible with the same level of resources to assess everybody. Essentially, no third party to be left behind is our little motto. So just to understand where you are in your evolution of looking at third-party risk programs, why don't we have a really quick poll? So we've prepared a really simple one here. So this is anonymous, so you don't need to worry about your answers being identified. But could you possibly just respond to one of these questions? So do you currently have a cyber risk assessment program in place for your third parties? I'll give you 30 seconds to review and respond to those. Great, thank you very much. So obviously, given today's topic, a lot of people who registered are clearly either already involved in or very interested in third-party risk management. So it's no surprise that, in fact, the majority of you do have a program in place, but again, some of you do not. So that's quite useful, and we will consider those as we go through today's presentation. So the first and key point that we want to make is, why is it important to assess and then monitor third-party risk? I think the really important point to note is that this list running here from the NormShield website is just simply a list of published third-party breaches in 2019. So it's a really major problem, but it's also compounded when companies share either confidential commercial information or personal and financial information, credit cards, personal information, etc., where other regulations and requirements are levied on companies to make sure that everyone has the same level of due diligence and care and due attention with that data. So I'm going to ask my colleague Andrew to step in here and talk about how we would advise you classify your third parties by risk and by criticality. Andrew, do you want to talk through the slide?
Thanks, Ronan. So what we want to look at to start off with is the relationship owner of the third party. That can be anybody in the organization who wishes to engage a third party. So it could be HR who have decided that they want to use the third party SaaS platform to look after all of the HR needs that you have in your organization. So you can add to this, and this is not necessarily a definitive list, but we start off by looking at how would we look at the criticality, or how would we classify that vendor from low risk right the way up to critical. And there's three things that we look at. The first is, do they have access to our data? Do they have access to the network? And do they have access to the premises? So that's reasonably simple. You might have some more that you want to add to that list. By all means, please add them. And you can put yourself a nice little matrix together and score them and come out with most critical. They're obviously the ones that have access to data, network, and premises. And someone who's low risk would actually have access to none of them. Can you bring up the chart, Ronan? So what we're trying to do, or what we'd like to achieve here, and it's the key theme for our whole presentation, this is a complete overview of what you are trying to do with your third parties. So on the left-hand side, what we've done is we've worked out how to very simply score our third parties on criticality. What we now want to do is we want to understand what cyber risk they bring to our business. And that is where we're going to do this evaluation at scale to get back the actual risk that they pose to our organization. Can you bring up the next bit? We're then going to look at our risk appetite. Now, in this slide, I've put the risk appetite as a straight line. It most certainly does not need to be a straight line. And this is purely dependent on your organization, and you can adjust it over time. So you might have, quite a large appetite to start off with an objective to move that appetite for less and less risk over a period of time. So on the left-hand side, it's acceptable. On the right-hand side, we need some remediation. So when we evaluate all of our third parties, we're going to be able to give them a position on this chart. And this, in a nutshell, is what today's presentation is about, or webinar. It's how you go about doing this very simply.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. So obviously the key is economically and efficiently assess all of your third parties at scale, because we're obviously well aware of many organizations that Elasticito works with, where maybe just those top high priority or high criticality vendors and third parties are manually assessed. So we want to talk about everybody from HR contractors and service providers all the way through to finance, information technology, marketing, etc. But it's a huge challenge, right? So at the moment, there are, I guess, two core options available to companies. The first will be to ask the third party about their internal security policies and procedures, and to provide some kind of evidence, maybe based on international standards like NIST or ISO 27001 or something. And I guess the typical way to do that would be to send out a security-based questionnaire, or maybe several different types of questionnaires based on the scenario, to that third party, ask them a bunch of questions, get them to respond to it, provide some supporting information. But that only tells you what they tell you and what their organization is essentially set up to look like. What it doesn't tell you is how a potential adversary could exploit their environment. And that's why we think the important second and parallel step to assessing risk is to look at an entity from an external perspective. And that is indeed what we're going to do today. We're going to show you how it is possible to provide a completely accurate and trustworthy view on an entity's profile to see what level of cyber hygiene and health does that entity have, and is it possible or is it likely that entity may or could be exploited and maybe put your data and your IP at risk. That's really what this is all about, of course. So if you're taking the premise that you're looking at risk ratings, automated risk assessment platforms like the one we're going to show you today, through the hundreds and hundreds of interactions that we've had with CISOs and corporate risk teams and procurement teams, they tell us that in order to adopt these kind of automating technologies, they need to feel really comfortable with these four things. Firstly, that the data is really accurate and that it is demonstrably accurate, that you can verify it against your internal security team's own knowledge and data of assets and IPs and issues. The second is that it's completely non-biased and that it can be trusted. So it's a super important point for, obviously, when we're looking at risk. But also, it is supposed to be an automation play here, and it therefore needs to demonstrate that it is significantly more efficient than doing this today the manual way, either using internal resources or external professional services. But also, most organizations that we work with, particularly in the area of third-party cyber risk management, they want their whole third-party ecosystem to raise the bar in general around cyber hygiene and cyber health in order to not just reduce the risk profile in your own organization, but to make the entire ecosystem more cyber healthy. So in that vein, it's really important that there's really clear instructions on how a company should fix and remediate issues that have been verified and have been shown to be true. So actionable information is super important as well. So we're going to walk you through a platform today called NormShield. It's not intended to be an out-and-out sales demonstration, but it is a great illustration of how you can use an automation platform to look at the mass assessment of cyber risk across a whole ecosystem of third parties, not just the super critical ones, but also all and any ones. I'm constantly reminded by my clients of the US retailer Target that was attacked by a third party, I believe, air conditioning supplier who had a portal that they gave access to Target. And I would doubt that that air conditioning manufacturer and third party would ever have been classified as a critical or high risk vendor to that organization. So it's quite a good example, I guess, of how every third party should be assessed. So we're going to talk a little bit about scorecards and automated cyber risk platforms. I'm going to get Andrew to walk you through that. So I'm just going to stop my screen very briefly, and Andrew will activate his. Go ahead, Andrew.
Thanks, Ryan. So in today's demonstration, I'm going to be making use of the NormShield Cyber Risk Scorecard portal to be able to evaluate the third-party vendors at risk. What's important is the outcome of this process and being able to do a bulk scan of all of your vendors if you have a large amount that you wanted to start off with. One of the reasons you might be required to do something like this, we're seeing legislation come through in various areas. Australia has CPS 234, California's just introduced new legislation, and the state of New York has just introduced new legislation, and I believe there's a whole chunk more territories coming on board that are requiring companies to do a cyber risk evaluation of all their third parties. So where I'd like to start with this exercise is just briefly running through how we would go about doing this. We could start off when we might be making use of a vendor management system that we have already in place, and it is very easy via an API to link into systems like NormShield to be able to share information with them, do the actual scan at scale, and pull the high-level information that you want back into the system. On today's demonstration, I'm just going to do this very basically. Excel spreadsheet, list of vendors. I'm going to sit and select my list of vendors over here. I'm going to copy them, and I'm going to go back and paste them into my portal over here. And from there, all I'm going to do is say scan or submit this list of vendors. I have the option to select which ecosystem I'm going to put these in. What is an ecosystem? It's where we group our vendors together, like it could be critical, they could be via location, it could be via vertical. Up to you how you want to choose that. We can also do some classification on those vendors if we wanted to. We could select the country, and we could give them a group name over and above the actual ecosystem that we put them into. What I'd do is I'd submit this, come back in probably 30 minutes to an hour. The rapid scorecard runs in 60 seconds as for you to do these each individually. We now have a overview of the vendors that we've managed to evaluate. This is what the information is going to look like that we get back once we've actually done or run that. I'm busy today looking at a vendor who we use for our CRM. Happens to be Pipedrive. They're a SaaS company out there. We store data in Pipedrive, so I would classify them as one of our critical vendors. And I'm starting off wanting to look at them from the perspective of a vendor and what information I can see about them. If I start off over here, look about more info, I can see when they're founded, where their headquarters are, who's involved, just some general information around social media. Depending on how well known the company is, there's more information that's usually available about it. But what is key and what I want to focus on, first of all, as an initial classification, is where I position this vendor on the actual chart. So I've started off and I've said they're critical because I share data with them, and I've now got an overall executive summary of what their risk is. Their risk is C+, and it's a score of 78. I can look over here on the right-hand side and I can look at individual categories, and I might decide that certain categories are irrelevant to my what I'm doing at the moment, like probably their web ranking. I might discard fraudulent domains. I might pick up key ones that are very important to my organization, like is leak credentials important? Is patch management important? Very probably. First pass is what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be looking at this and saying, does this meet my risk appetite? Seeing as this is a critical vendor, I'm going to take this one step further and I'm going to drill down and look at the digital footprint that I've come back with here. And I'm not applying any cybersecurity knowledge to this vendor right at this moment in time. What I'm doing is looking and saying I've classified as a critical vendor, I've got these domains back, and I can see that they happen to have more registered domains. What does this tell me? It tells me that I probably need to do a deeper dive on this vendor if it's critical to my organization. But for the moment, and with what I'm trying to do on this exercise as initial pass, I've got the information I need from the executive summary, from the security posture, and an overview of each of the categories. Now, before I move any further onto that, what I want to have a look at is, what does this mean? This needs to be intuitive if you're doing this so everybody gets what we're up to. So a straight A to F grading with some colors associated with it is very intuitive. If it's nice and green, we take that to be great, no issue. As it heads down to sort of into the average, into the red color, we know that that is danger or signifies danger, and we probably have an issue. For this demo, what I've done is I've said that our cyber risk appetite, I'm drawing a line at 77%, which is C+ or better. So anything below that, I said we need to do further investigation and it doesn't suit our risk appetite. We also need to look at where the score is, or how these categories have been scored and what weighting is given to those, so that we can see that there is a good weighting. This and it's properly spread amongst the scorecard that we're doing. It also helps us when we're looking at remediation. Where do we think we should go to remediate risk appetite first? The higher the weighting, the more we probably want to focus on it, like patch management here and application security, which both have high weighting factors. What's also of vital importance is how this information is brought together and the score is achieved. If it is an open standard, something like MITRE that works on a common weakness scoring system, then that is good. This is about transparency, trust, everybody understands it, everybody has been very acceptant of it. So as long as it is based on standards like that, there's a lot greater chance of acceptance and comfort with the actual data that's provided. If I move on from the rapid scorecard that I did and we move into our critical vendors, what the difference between that is we ended up with something that was done in 60 seconds across 10 categories. We've now moved into a complete deep dive of the organization, and that deep dive puts it across 20 categories. Not all might be needed. The score is going to be relatively consistent, within usually about 5%, but we've added some more categories into this. We now have 20. I'm still interested at this moment in time in the actual score overall being a B- and the actual percentage that I happen to have. Notice that the score has gone up slightly because we've added some good categories into this exercise compared to the actual rapid. But I'm still sitting looking at this from the overall high-level posture of the different grades per category and what our overall score happens to be. What is also of interest that needs to be shared with our third party is the digital footprint. Our digital footprint that we use is what is the foundation of how all the scores are derived. So if you're working with your third party, this is not an exact science. This information is compiled from different data sources out on the internet. And that's the other thing that I really need to mention today. When I show you any information that's out there, it's all open source intelligence that is all freely available in the public domain. So you can scan with these type of tools, you can gather all of this information and bring it together about any organization that happens to be out there. So getting your digital footprint and verifying a digital footprint is very important. You might want to share the digital footprint you have with your third party and say to your third party, look, you know, is this accurate? Do I have something or everything? Have I missed stuff out? Or is there stuff included in here that is not part of your organization? And if so, why? And this is where we get to the actual sharing of the data and having this close link with your third party. Being able to easily share data, like being able to take this URL and giving this URL to the third party and saying, I'm going to share it with you like this. Being able to click through to the data that is underlying here is also of importance because this gives you a 3D type interaction with the information. Also being able to easily share that information either by sharing a scorecard and saying, yes, you may come and have access to the actual portal here, and I'll put in a name and address, or by going out and saying what we'd like to do is we will share the scorecard with you, and again, I can share a scorecard with them by sharing a URL. The big power of this is it still has the ability to be able to click through and get all the detail about this report. You can, do the old-fashioned way of give them a PDF, very 2D type view of the organization, but it takes a whole power out of how you might want to do this. I've still been keeping this very, very high level and not being delving down into the actual cyber so that your third party and analysts can actually make use of this demo or this information. If we delve down into, again, not applying a lot of knowledge to this exercise, but if we wanted to share stuff with our third party, we've gone into now the deep dive of how would I actually do this and how would I share stuff with my third party if I wanted them to see all of the results and the failings. This is a list of all of the failings that we've got. Again, very easily selected. I've chosen the scorecard that I've just run on them. I've chosen the different modules that I'd like to share because I believe, or my cyber risk posture has decided that they're relevant to the third party and our risk appetite. And I've asked for all the failed outputs. I now have this information. This can be a standard template that you make use of. I now have a list of 37 entries that I'd like my third party to address. What's very important for that third party is I want to help my third party as well, being able to address that. So I want them to understand why, what is this? So knowledge base, very important to be able to click through and understand that this is restricted or access authentication attempts or login without bot detection. We know that there's bots running around. There's wonderful articles out there about how bots are interacting with everything. This is reasonably critical. It means that someone can access this platform using bots and there's absolutely no detection around it. We have all the associated information with it, including a common weakness score, which is broken down into various other findings, which we will be describing in more detail in one of our later webinars. So that is the information from the knowledge base, but I also want to be able to provide them with information on how to remediate it. Very simple. See more, and we have remediation information about how to actually fix that finding out there. So on the one side, we have gone from an overview of the organization, very high level, to very simply being able to completely drill down and give findings to someone who in a specialist form would be able to look at this and say, right, here we have this information. I'm not going to drill down into different ways of remediation. We can most certainly cover that individually with you, and how we address false positives or how we acknowledge information, and various ways to go about doing that, again, generically when interacting with your third party. You might want to, when you are initially evaluating your third parties, maybe an RFI time, or when you are thinking about inviting parties for an RFI, to do a complete quick comparison. We've done just a quick view here of couple of companies. These happen to be some companies sitting down in Ghana that we've been working with. We've used rapids on them. So a 60-second view of the company. How do they stack up against each other? What are their strengths and weaknesses? Are we happy doing business with them? You can do this with your peers. You can do this with any of your third parties. You can look at third parties in difficult geographical areas, different verticals to see how they stack up against each other. Brief overview of what's happening. And finally, what I'd like to show is having a look at all of your third parties and being able to understand your complete ecosystem. What are my best third parties? What are my worst third parties? If I look at it and I'm drawing the line, maybe, I've said my risk appetite is greater than a C. Well, all of these companies are fine. These companies are below it. I can see where my trend is actually going on this information. So very quickly from my dashboard, I can start having a look at what critical issues are that need to be fixed, how much I've got around patch management. It also goes into fourth parties and auto-discovering of fourth parties associated with these vendors. So I can click through to all of these and very quickly find out what the big issues are around this. And I can also get alerts the moment something new comes along, a zero-day exploit, or something that could be impacting our ecosystem that needs immediate attention. And I want to get those alerts out to my third parties there because they could be impacting our business. So that's very briefly how we could take this information. I said we were going to automate the process. We started off by doing it at bulk, and I said you could do it via an API. Equally, you could take this high-level information back via an API into your system or your vendor management system, and quite quickly turn around with your risk appetite and say, give me a list of everybody who happens to be, less than the risk appetite. I can sort this information that way as well. So very quickly, I've gone through 100 vendors and been able to look at their cyber risk posture. I can now put them on my graph, and I now have a complete overview of, very simply, who meets my risk appetite, and I've also classified my vendors according to criticality. Brennan, I think it's back to you.
That's great. Thank you, Andrew. Just reminding people that we're very happy to take your questions, and if you just go to the bottom of your screen, there should be a Q&A button. Click on it, type your question, we will see it, and we'll answer the questions at the end of the session. So I'm sure that walkthrough of the NormShield platform might have triggered some intrigue and questions in your head, so please don't feel shy. Please ask questions and we'll happily help answer them for you. So just a really rapid recap, we did mention about some kind of key measurement points, if you like, around if you were to use automation technologies, can they be a suitable alternative to the way you're currently working? And the platform you've just seen is based on completely open source information and intelligence. The scoring system is based on the MITRE's 2 frameworks for looking at risk management scoring in cyber. I won't bore you with the details right now, but we'll send this presentation out to all registrants afterwards, and there are links in here to those frameworks. And we weren't quite brave enough today to do an ad hoc brand new rapid scorecard, but it generally takes about 60 seconds. And we're going to ask in a few moments whether you would like us to send a scorecard for your own company, or if you want to nominate a pet third party you're currently evaluating or you have particular interest in, we'll very happily send that to you afterwards. And it provides detailed information on what the third parties and indeed your own teams need to do to remediate and fix any problems. So just going back and answering this whole central question and theme of today's webinar, which is, can you use technology to assess third parties at scale and do a good or better job than humans are doing today? The last point may be questionable, but certainly what we want to do is to use this technology to reinforce and help humans to do their analysis better. And we very much are of the belief that this technology, economically as well as practically, can be used to scan and to analyze every single third party, not just the upper echelons and the highest risk ones. And if you would go back to our little matrix here, maybe you'll end up with something that looks something similar to this, where you have a mixture of, very detailed, eyes-on, comprehensive scorecard. Maybe also if you have internal audit teams who go out and do on-site audits with third parties, they can use this tool to really help them to go through their methodologies to assess that risk. All the way through to just simply periodic ad hoc analysis of a vendor's profile. And if anything jumps out that's of concern, that you and your third parties are aware of that. So we very much do feel that no third party should be left behind. And this platform can absolutely do that for you. So I did mention that we're very happy within reason to allow you to request a scorecard either for your own company or for a company that you want to nominate. So I'm just going to open a quick poll again on screen, and I'm not going to publish the results of this, but if you do want us to send you a scorecard for your company, then just respond to this question, so the questionnaire, if you like, and we'll send that afterwards. It's completely free, by the way, and there's no commitments on any sales side. I'll just leave that open for a few more seconds. Okay, thank you very much. So we will, for those of you who said yes, please send one. We will be in touch shortly and get that sent off to you. Just a quick note, we are holding another webinar, which is kind of closely related to this, and is very much, we see 2020, 2021 as being a hugely interesting topic for lots of companies, which is how do you quantify the cyber risk profile of an entity? Or in other words, what is the financial impact of the current security posture of either your own company or a third party, but particularly in this case, third parties. So we're going to be running a webinar around the notion of the FAIR quantification model. You can Google FAIR, but it's a non-profit organization set up by cyber risk professionals to ultimately create a model to calculate financial impacts of cyber risk postures. So I'm just going to come out of this view here. I'm going to copy this URL for you, and I will paste it. Where would you want me to paste it? I will paste it in the chat window. So I'm just going to do that now. If that's of particular interest, you can click on our landing page there and register directly. But equally, we'll send out a copy of this presentation after today. So, there's a great question here about how this platform compares against other solutions in this marketplace, and we're absolutely aware that there are several choices. The question specifically relates to BitSight and Security Scorecard. You know, these kind of solutions are all in the same ballpark. They all ultimately help companies to assess cyber risk. I think the platform that you saw today was just slightly different in that the initial use case actually came from a penetration testing scenario background. So it is very much a platform that was developed to help cyber risk professionals and testing teams to run assessments at scale. So rather than just look at the numerical score or a letter grade, to provide very detailed technical information on what is the problem, what's the source of the problem, and how should it be fixed and remediated. We're very happy. We know both of those other vendors and several others extremely well. We're very happy to go into much more detail on a one-to-one if you want to do that. But ultimately, I guess this platform was developed within a sort of non-governmental organization environment. So it's all about transparency. It's about independent data. It's about using peer-reviewed scoring and grading methodologies, et cetera, et cetera. So when we look at things like quantification, for instance, it's not the vendor's view on quantification, it's the FAIR Institute or those kind of things.
If I may add to that, Ronan, just quickly on that point, really the major difference is we're a consumption-based platform, or NormShield is. There's also the FAIR model, which is quantification that Ronan's also mentioned. There's the number of categories, and there's also the number of data points. We have within the platform over 480 different data sources or data points that we look at. So you get a large in-depth view that's all scaled very nicely using a independent MITRE framework to bring that up to a easy to understand grading of AF to F. But we're very, very welcome to, do bake-offs, let people have a look at it and make their own mind up as to what happens to be fit for purpose.
Okay, there's a question also about whether it's possible to create new tests and scans on ad hoc, or do we have to have them in the database already? So first and foremost, there is no, the answer is ad hoc, by the way, so we don't need to have a company's profile in our system. So there are two types of scorecards. Andrew showed what we call a rapid scorecard, which is like the top level initial due diligence test. And that literally takes 60 seconds. So for those of you who've requested a copy of a scorecard, we'll send you the current today's version of that 60-second scorecard by way of demonstration for that point. The other point is that maybe in comparison with the first question around other providers, we don't have a data of amalgamated intelligence and data on company profiles. When we run a scorecard, it goes out live, just like a potential adversary would do, to information sources that are available either as commercial data feeds or as open source data feeds and intelligence on a company's externally facing infrastructure. So in other words, it's a live snapshot. So to answer that other question another way, 60 seconds for the rapid, and for the more comprehensive version, typically about 3 to 4 hours is what we would allow per comprehensive. But it's certainly within half a day, and it's pretty much instantaneous otherwise. Please do keep your questions coming because they're very good. We do have a question about whether this can be used to assess all third parties, and I think we probably answered that during the presentation, but we would actually recommend that, yes, maybe not on day one, but ultimately we would love to bring you on a journey to assess everyone, whether it's somebody you don't think is being important or somebody that you think is extremely critical, because it is it's useful to see if there are any cyber risk googlies that come out of a scorecard sometimes. Sometimes you see very unexpected things happen for what you perceive to be best in class or indeed not critical vendors that you work with. And then lastly, I have a question about how we define at scale. It's actually, it's a nice question actually, because we do quite often have debates around this. So when we talk to information security and cyber risk teams, generally it would seem on average, I'm not saying this is the rule of thumb, but when companies send out questionnaires and assess risk based on we're going to ask you some questions, you respond to those questions and provide us some support information, there does seem to be a kind of upper end tolerance to that. And I would say on average, it's somewhere between 100 and 150 entities. I think beyond that, it gets kind of overwhelming for information security teams and risk teams to handle huge volumes of questionnaires, either the outbound follow-ups and chasing third parties to complete those questionnaires or analyzing them. So I would say the answer at scale is we would say everybody beyond the 100 that are maybe manually assessed through questionnaires. You can take my comment with a pinch of salt, by the way, because you may be assessing way more than I've just said or less. But generally, that is our observation. And we would suggest that the at scale thing would be, it's very possible to do this in the thousands or in some cases tens of thousands. And there are some extremely large organizations using this for very, very large third-party ecosystems. I think that's the end of my questions on screen. If there are any others, we'll leave our details on the screen here. So I'm Ronan, and Andrew was my colleague co-presenting today. Our emails are on screen. You can also check out NormShield, the platform that you saw in the demonstration, at normshield.com. Otherwise, I will just say thank you very much for attending today's session. I hope you found it valuable and a good use of your time. Please do consider the risk quantification webinar in February. We think it's going to be super interesting and a very important topic for the future. Thank you so much for your time again, and we hope to hear from you or indeed interact with you in sometime in the future. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.